I'm Kathryn Buxton, and since discovering the joy of meditation in my late 30s, I've been on a journey of self-discovery that has introduced me to some fascinating ideas. Join me as I take a deeper dive into the areas of our well-being that we just don't give enough attention to. Would our lives really be any better if we took our well-being seriously? Each week I'll be joined by a well-being specialist to unpick the value of sleep, nutrition, kindness and so much more. This is Things You Should Care About podcast in association with Isbourne.org. Welcome to Things You Should Care About podcast with me, Kathryn Buxton, in association with the Isbourne, and I'm joined this morning by the very lovely Karen Sue. Welcome to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. It's lovely to be here.
You mentioned on your website that you first got interested in Qigong from watching your grandfather, which sounds like a lovely experience. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, my grandfather, I only knew him as a child, but as a child, I remember watching him and seeing him practicing Tai Chi, or it could have been Qigong, in the garden. And so it wasn't unfamiliar to me. It was introduced to me at a very early age. I didn't think too much of it at the time because I was a child, but as I grew older, I went to visit Taiwan, which is where my mother's from, and that's where I was more formally introduced to Qigong. So I had been exposed to it as a child from my grandfather, and I knew that my grandfather had a very calm air about him. I only learned his full story as an adult, and that's another story. So my grandfather was part of 140,000 Chinese labourers that came over in the First World War as part of the Allied troops. Basically, he came was one of 140,000. Many people don't know about this story, and I didn't even know about it. We don't learn about it in history. I learned about it from my father, who learned about it from him directly, from my grandfather. But he was a very calm, steady, stable character. He was able to command without shouting. He was able to command just with a look. And I never heard him once raise his voice. I never heard him once argue. And he had this very kind of steady, strong constitution about him. He'd been through the war. He'd been through all sorts of seen all sorts of atrocities, and had ended up by hook or by crook in the West, in England. And he actually recommended to all the family that we all learn a martial art of some description, because he had learned Kung Fu and Tai Chi and Qigong himself, and he believes it had saved his life on several occasions. So I was introduced to this idea of Qigong, martial arts, Tai Chi early on. When I went to Taiwan and I visited family there, my mother's side of the family, I started to practice a formal Qigong, Tai Chi class. I went to a class weekly. I was there on a cultural exchange, really, and I was learning about, Chinese calligraphy, brush painting.
When your grandfather said it helped save his life, what did he mean? In a physical sense, it helped save his life, or in a kind of emotional, mental sense? Because obviously going through something like a war must have been extremely stressful.
I think it saved his life in both senses. I really do. I know that when he first came to Cheltenham, he got involved. There was a lot of prejudice at the time. He came to Cheltenham in the 1940s. He was in Liverpool in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And when he first came to Cheltenham, I don't think there was another Chinese family here. And he suffered, lots of situations where he was faced with some very hostile
prejudice, racism.
Yes, and he was able to save himself and fight off several men in one go, which he had to do. He was put in that position, and his martial arts training helped him there. But I do genuinely believe, having practiced Qigong now for 29 years, I do believe that the mental strength that you gain from the practice is what helped him through those 4 years, 1916 to 1920, because in 1916 he was slap bang in the middle of the war. He just arrived, 19 years old, expecting to do some farm work, and was put onto an active airfield where bombs were being dropped regularly. And he, at the age of 19, it must have been, I just can't imagine how he must have felt. He must have been frightened, terrified, and a long way from home. There was no boat taking him back. He couldn't go back, so he had to accept the situation and deal with it. And I think that his martial arts training, his Tai Chi training or Qigong training, whatever it was, helped to bring him through that time and deal with what he had to deal with, which was of death, lots of death of his colleagues, and even at the end of the war in 1918, when everybody went home, or the British soldiers went home, or the French soldiers went home, it was the Chinese labourers who were left for 2 years after the war to clear up the mess. They were the ones that had to clear the landmines. They were the ones that clear the land of live munitions for civilians to be able to live there again. And they were the ones that also had to bury all the dead in cemeteries, which is a pretty difficult time. And many of them died in that 2 years following the end of the war, from landmines, live munitions, and of course the Spanish flu.
What an amazing man to have in your family as a role model, and I guess from him you developed this love of Qigong.
Well, from him, that was where I first was exposed to it. And then it was my mother who sent me off didn't send me off, but she said, you need to go to Taiwan and discover some more of your roots there, because I was born and brought up in Cheltenham. I was completely westernized, living in quite a traditional Chinese family, but nevertheless didn't really know that much about Chinese culture, not as much as my mum wanted me to know. So I went to Taiwan, and that's when I first came across Qigong and Tai Chi there. And my very first lesson, nobody spoke a word of English. I went in, and there was a group of students and the teacher was a little elderly Chinese man, quite stout, but elderly. He had white hair, and he had a lovely gentle face. He stood in the middle of the room and he asked me with his hand gestures to push him over. Well, you can imagine, I'm 18 years old. I'm sort of, I'm there. My mother has sent me over. I'm there as, I've been well brought up, supposedly. And there is this little old man asking me to push him over. And I tentatively pushed him, as you do, politely.
Yeah.
And I could feel that he was like a rock. I felt he was really solid. I thought, oh my goodness, interesting. And he said no, and he sort of said with his gestures, no, push me. I mean it, push me. This is what he was saying. And all the students were, beckoning me to push him over. I thought, oh dear, really? I pushed him harder. He didn't budge. And it became a bit of a game. They were really egging me on, the other students, and he was laughing, smiling. He wanted me to push him over. So eventually I thought, okay, you've asked for it. I actually took a run up. And I jumped at him because I had pushed a few times. I could feel how solid he was. I ran up to him, and I basically jumped, and with my shoulder barged into him. I ended up on the floor. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor looking up at him, and everybody was laughing. Laughing their heads off. And at that moment, I just thought, there's something in this. There's really something in this. And I started to notice, I guess you could call it, I started to notice a kind of inner strength, like an inner peace, I suppose. As an 18-year-old, you're a little bit all over the place. Hormones everywhere, and you're not sure how to live in the world and how to be. Are you a child? Are you an adult? It's a quite confusing time. And I found that it gave me this feeling of peace, calm, steadiness. and I started to really enjoy it. And then I'd spent 6 months in Taiwan. I decided I was going to travel a bit more before I went back to England to start university, because I'd had a gap year after A levels. I thought I'll spend a couple of months in Thailand. So I went over to Thailand. I went to this island that I'd been told about in Taiwan, Koh Phangan, in the south of Thailand, and there was a Tai Chi school there. And I thought, brilliant, this is fantastic. I'm meant to be here. So I spent the next month learning Tai Chi, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at sunset every day for a month by the sea. And that was it. I was hooked. That was it. That was the moment. After that experience, I just thought, okay, this is what I want to do. I thought, I don't want to do it now, but when I'm about 80, I'll become a Tai Chi or Qigong teacher. Got to 45 2 years ago, and I thought, I can't wait till I'm 80. I actually felt that it was, in a way, it was my duty to do it at that time. I felt that I couldn't keep it to myself because it had given me so much in my life, so much positivity, so much strength, so much security, reassurance, and just peace. I thought it's my duty to share this. I know that people in the world are suffering. People around me were starting to get ill, and I was experiencing and seeing people suffering. And I knew that this helped me through all of the different traumatic experiences that we all go through in our lives. Qigong and Tai Chi were the practices that always brought me through. They were the ones that they were my safety net.
That's interesting, because the kind of strength and the centeredness and the groundedness and the solidity that you found in that experience was what you saw reflected in your grandfather all those years ago. So it's a nice way that you were able to connect with him too. How did you find the kind of cultural shock or cultural differences, let's say, from coming from Cheltenham at 18 over to Taiwan, not speaking the language, etc.? How did you find that?
It was a shock. It was a shock at the time, but I had family there. And family there were, even though they'd never met me before, were incredibly hospitable, treated me as one of their own. But I found the cultural shock coming back from my travels more harder to deal with than the shock going out there, believe it or not. And I was surprised at that. I felt like I was learning something new every day when I was there. So it was exciting, it was an adventure, and at the same time I was safe because I was with family. And I had had a glimpse of all these things from my mother, but I then started to really understand where my mother was from. And it deepened my understanding of my own mother and my relationship with her. And when I saw where she had come from, I could just, it sort of closed the circle for me. It became something that I could see. When you start to find out about your ancestors, for me, I've noticed as I've got older and I've started to find out about family and generations further away, it starts to make a bigger picture, and it starts to make things more clear and full and enriched. And I started to understand my mother more. I started to understand her upbringing. I started to understand the way she thinks. And I've got very much a duality going on because my father was born in England, and he was brought up, he was Church of England. My mother was Buddhist Taoist. So I was brought up in a household that was very mixed. We had all sorts of different celebrations going on, as well as all the Western ones. We also had the Eastern ones. Yeah. And, I had a really much deeper understanding when I went to Taiwan. And then when I started finding out about my grandfather's history, again, I had another deeper level of understanding there, because then I understood that part he had played in the Great War. And I'd always felt a little displaced. And when I found out and I understood and I started to learn more about what my grandfather had been through and what he had done in the Great War, I started to really feel part of Britain really started to feel that connection there. And so, you know, it's been a really interesting journey to bring the two sides together, the Western world and the Eastern world for me, because I've kind of had a foot in each one. And now I feel that, you know, I understand more. I feel that the Eastern practice of Qigong and Tai Chi is something that the West really, you know, the West could really, it could benefit from.
Yeah. What is the difference between Tai Chi and Qigong?
Okay, so most people have heard about Tai Chi, heard
Mm.
of Tai Chi. It seems to be more popular in some ways. Tai Chi could actually be seen to be a subset of Qigong. It's almost as if Tai Chi is like a whole body Qigong. It's got its origins in martial arts, but Qigong dates much further back than Tai Chi. So Qigong, there's all sorts of debates on how old Qigong actually is. Some people say 4,000 years, 5,000 years, 6,000 years. There are texts that describe the practice of Dandong, which is standing Qigong, which are 6,000 years old.
Wow.
So it's old, it's very old, it's ancient. Tai Chi is dated at around 1,500 years old. So in relative terms, it's fairly young in comparison to Qigong. Tai Chi is a form, and it's a set of movements that are practiced slowly and continuously, one move after another. And there are different styles, different family styles of Tai Chi. But Qigong is really posture, moving exercise, and meditation.
Okay.
So it encompasses a range of movements and non-movements.
And would you say people come to Qigong because they want the physical activity, or is Qigong more of a kind of a spiritual activity, do you think?
I think initially most people come to Qigong because, number one, it's easier than Tai Chi, because Tai Chi is almost a bit of a memory test at the beginning. You have to learn a certain set of movements and you have to remember them in order. Qigong is individual exercises that you just learn and you repeat. Qigong, I think, appeals to people first of all on a physical level.
Mm.
It can be practiced by anybody, all abilities, all ages, all sizes, shapes, genders, everything. It's so accessible. Because it's so gentle, it's so simple, there's no special equipment required, there's no special clothing involved, you don't have to get on the floor even, and you can even do all the exercises sitting down. So people come to Qigong because it's very often practiced outside. We practice it outside twice a week, and it's just a beautiful, simple, joyful practice. And people feel that it's something they can do particularly if they're feeling their mobility is not as good as it used to be, they're not as flexible as they used to be, or perhaps they've had an injury. Qigong is definitely seen as a very accessible form of exercise. So most people come for the physical side of it first of all. What happens then is that when they practice it, the more they practice it, the more they start to feel not just the physical benefits, but they start to feel the mental benefits, because it calms the mind. At the same time, it energizes the body, but it calms the mind. And then they start to feel emotional benefits. It starts to steady the nerves. It starts to fortify the emotions, and it helps to release suppressed or repressed emotions. And then following on from that, when they start to become more still in themselves, when they start to become more calm and they start to relax, they then can get the spiritual benefits. Because as you know, in your practice, you're a meditation teacher, you've been doing it for a long time. When you become still, you can start to listen a bit better, can't you? Because when you're still, everything quietens down, and then you can start to strengthen the inside. You can start to strengthen your intuition, your internal power. And so when we practice Qigong, all of these benefits are available. Plus, we also connect not to our own internal Qi. Qi means life force or vital force or life energy. So not only do we connect with our own internal Qi, we also connect with the Qi around us. So according to Qigong practice and traditional Chinese medicine, there's energy all around us. And this is also proved in science. We connect to the earth's energy, we connect to the sky's energy, and we connect to the energy all around us. So yes, it is a spiritual practice, definitely, Kathryn, I would say. However, it can be whatever you want it to be. If you want to do it for the physical benefits, do it for the physical benefits. If you want to do it for the mental clarity, you do it for that. And if you want to then do it for the growth and development of your spiritual body, then by all means do it for that. So it's a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think you make that point interestingly about the connection with meditation. I find that when people come to me for meditation, they come for feeling relaxed. They want to feel calm. They want to feel relaxed, and often that's what they get, and they are able to then access this deep stillness that I think is within all of us. And it's from that place of stillness that for some people, or for a lot of people, it leads to this kind of spiritual journey where people are accessing something vaster than themselves. Whether you want to call it God or the universe or the divine or whatever you want to label, you want to put on it. It is a way of accessing something much, much bigger. And you can only do that through stillness and through feeling this kind of spaciousness within you. And I guess Qigong gives you that too.
Yes, sometimes it's called meditation in movement. Tai Chi has also been called meditation in movement. Some people, some Qigong practitioners, call it medication in movement. But yes, you're absolutely right. There is that feeling. There is a saying in Qigong which is stillness in movement and movement in stillness. So when you're moving, you start to still the mind. As you're moving the body, you're bringing a stillness and a calm to the mind. And then when you're standing, for example, in Dandong, which is a standing Qigong, as we stand still, we start to notice the movement within the body as we're just standing still. So those practices allow that deeper listening that you're speaking about. It allows that tapping into something that is more than just our, flesh and bones and what we see.
Do you find it's helped you and your family or the people around you that do it?
It's helped so many people. I mean, it's been going for so long. As I said, people talk of it being 6,000 years old. And they reckon 20 million people were practicing in 1987. And then in 1992, they did another survey. And they reckon 70 to 80 million people. So that was nearly 30 years ago. It's grown since then. So there are perhaps, I don't know, worldwide, perhaps 1 billion people practicing it. And those people practicing it are not practicing it if it doesn't work.
Yeah. But do you find, Karen, that you have to adapt what you do for a Western participants? Is it different in the West than it would be if you're doing it in the East?
I suppose in some ways the way of teaching is different. When I was learning in Taiwan, you don't really question the teacher. You learn it and you copy and you do it very diligently and you practice, repetition, and it's almost, I think in some schools in East Asia, I wouldn't say it's like a military operation, but it's very disciplined. It's super disciplined. In the West, it's the exercises themselves are not adapted. They're not adapted. But after my sessions, I do have a very short discussion about things that participants might want to ask. We might have a bit of a Q&A, and they might want to share something with the group. So I think that that's beneficial for everybody to hear other people's experiences that are in the group and to ask questions that they might have, because other people in the group might have questions and they want them answered. I can't guarantee that I'll answer them. That's the other thing. But I'll always, give what I can. So in terms of the exercises themselves, no, there is not really any adaptation for the Western world, as opposed to, say, practicing in East Asia, for the actual exercises themselves. Those exercises I've learned from teachers who have had those passed down from other teachers and so on and so on. Many, many years ago, and we were talking, sort of 10th century onwards till about the middle of the 20th century, Qigong and Tai Chi Qigong was kind of a bit of a secret. There were some imperial families that kept particular Qigong exercises to themselves and didn't share them.
How was that? Why did they do that? Was that because they felt they were getting something from it they didn't want to share with anyone else?
I think one of the reasons was they didn't want enemies to get hold of these practices. They didn't want their so-called enemies to be able to learn these ways of building up your energy and your inner strength and power. There was this idea that you had to be worthy to learn the practice, perhaps. I mean, that's what I've read in certain books, is that there was this idea that you had to be worthy to learn the practice, which is obviously ridiculous, because anything that helps humanity, anything that helps people's health, is a good thing to be shared. But there was this idea that certain things were to be kept secret, and actually a lot of practices were lost in that way, because the people that held the knowledge passed away, and if they didn't pass it on to anybody else, that knowledge was lost.
Difference in one sense from the East to the West is that in the East you don't have a question and answer session at the end of each Qigong exercise. You just take what the teacher has given you, and that has been passed down, and you accept that for what it is. You don't question it.
As far as I know, but actually I'm talking about when I was there and my own experience, which was 29 years ago. Today it may be very different.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of people practicing Qigong, and people, I think, because they went through a stage during the Cultural Revolution where Qigong was basically officially prohibited. Taoism was considered, which is the philosophy of which Qigong is a subsection, was considered counter-revolutionary. So I think from 1966 to 76 it was officially prohibited, and it was actively discouraged, and people were punished for practicing it. I think fortunately so many people were practicing it that it never was able to be suppressed and lost. So that was all resurrected again after. And I think people now, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps they are more able to be open and question. There are certainly a lot more books about it. There are a lot more teachers. So I'm only talking really about my experience regarding, how it was taught. But I do think that, when you look at the way martial arts are taught in the East, for example, you've probably seen the Shaolin Temple monks.
Yes.
Thing. I mean, that's extremely disciplined. It's grueling, the training. And they do practice forms of Qigong, because Qigong is often used in martial arts because it is a way of generating and cultivating your inner qi, your energy. So it gives you this inner strength and power.
So you mentioned a bit there about the Chinese government banning it for a while, but it seems to me that the Chinese government has had a lot of control or influence or concerns around Qigong. Can you sort of briefly summarise what all that's about?
Well, I'm no expert in what's happening in China with Qigong, but I do know that it was during the Cultural Revolution that it was officially prohibited. But previous to that and after that, actually, there has been a lot of research into Qigong, and it was very much, lauded as a fantastic health exercise. And they've done all sorts of experiments and tests to show how it benefits various illnesses, diseases, conditions. So I don't think that's the case now. I don't think that's the case now at all. I think there's a lot of research going into Qigong now, but there was a lot going into Qigong up to the Cultural Revolution. It basically was like the doors closed on it in 1966, and then they kind of opened again in 1976. But I think during that time, a lot of the practitioners had left China and actually travelled to other places. But I don't think, as far as I know, Qigong is practiced in pretty much every park in China. In the morning, if you go, you will see people practicing. Same in Taiwan, in Hong Kong. So as far as I know, there is one there's one section of Qigong called Fa Lun Da Fa, which I understand, I don't know much about it, but I hear and I've read that there is some serious opposition to that particular form of Qigong.
It's interesting, I suppose, because there's that kind of interesting mix in Qigong of the kind of spiritual, and also the strength and the power behind it as well, that makes people perhaps want to control it so that they can keep control of the power and also keep control of people's minds in terms of their sort of spiritual development. And I suppose someone like China, which is heavily state controlled or has been, Qigong it can be a bit of a threat, I suppose.
Perhaps it does. What it does do is it certainly encourages the development of your own inner strength, as we've spoken about before. That's for sure. But there is definitely a lot of research going on in China, and I know that China has hosted several international conferences for the exchange of information on Qigong science. So it's something that they're certainly interested in.
People are interested in joining your classes, Kathryn. Where can they find out about you?
Well, probably the best place to go is the website, which is www.shibashiqigong.com, which is spelled Shibashi, and then Qigong is spelled Qigong. And there you'll see a little bit about Qigong. You'll see the classes that we do. So we do 5 online classes a week, and we do 2 face-to-face outdoor classes a week, as long as there's no lockdown. So
sure.
Yeah, we do a morning class in Pitfall Park, in front of the pump room, every Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. That is a free class. We collect donations for our chosen charity, which this year is the Woodland Trust. And then on Monday, we have a Qigong in the Woods session, which is 2 till 3 in the afternoon in the magnificent setting of Lineover Wood, which is just opposite the reservoir as you go out of Cheltenham. It's a 1,000-year-old wood, possibly more, and it's just so wonderful to do Qigong and be able to practice it under those trees.
So Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us today. And I've got the last question I want to ask you, which we're asking everybody who joins us on our podcast. And it's, what one piece of advice has someone given you that you would like to pass on?
Yes, this is a difficult question because there are so many things that, I could say, all sorts of things. I could say, live your best life. I could say, leave a situation better than you found it. There's all sorts of big things that you could say, but what I think I would like to offer is something really simple and really practical. And it's something that one of my teachers said to me. She said to me, mind the gap. And what she meant by that was, I think when people want to do something to bring positivity into their lives, they think they have to do something really big. And they think they have to take on a big project, or they have to go on a big health fitness regime, or a change of, their whole diet. that kind of thing. And then it can feel quite daunting and overwhelming. And I think people can feel that, oh, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy to do all of that. But what she said was, mind the gap. And she said, think about all the times in your day where you have a gap, whether you're waiting for the kettle, the toaster, standing at the checkout, sitting on a bus, perhaps you're a passenger in a car. Those are the times, they might just be a few minutes, might just be 2 minutes. Those are the times when you can actually bring something really positive into your life. Whether you just start to take some deep breaths all the way down into your lower belly and just relax, just take that moment to just find that calm place just for a few minutes, even a few seconds. And you know, that little practice right there has added to your day. And then there'll be another gap later on. You might be standing at the bus stop and you think, well, the bus has got another 5 minutes to go. Well, you could be standing in Qigong, for example. You could be standing in Wuji position, which is the posture of power. And that is the posture that allows Qi to flow unimpeded through the body. And that's what we want when we practice Qigong. We want Qi to flow clearly, so that that healing energy, that energizing Qi can reach every cell. And 5 minutes of Dandong, 5 minutes of standing Qigong is really powerful. And so she was saying, if you add up all those minutes in your day where you're just waiting, all those gaps, you've actually got a pretty good Qigong practice right there, you know, or a really good meditation practice right there, or a really good mindfulness practice. Perhaps you've got, you know, a whole 20 minutes a day just filling in those little gaps where you're literally doing nothing else. There are lots of different things that you can do. And when we practice Qigong in our classes, I often share very, very simple practices, whether it's just pressing on a particular acupuncture point just to balance your heart health, or whether it's just breathing into the lower dantian just to increase your lung capacity, or whether it's just imagining a particular visualization, and that just helps to calm the mind. There are all sorts of different things that you can do, and it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be a great big difficult, you know, committed regime that you have to adhere to. So that's what I'd like to offer today. Mind the gap.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful, Karen. And there are lots of gaps in the day, like you say, so we can just sit and experience the wonderfulness of the gap. Thank you so much indeed for sharing that with us. And thank you so much for being with us today this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.